So let me go ahead and get us started tonight. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Iram Hawk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy. And thank you to all of you for joining us today for our presentation on the developmental arc and progression of the language program at Carroll. Our goal tonight is to shed some light on the complexities of the considerations that feed into student placement and programming. Stephanie, Ali, and I will first talk about the big picture considerations and then shift to the three main domains of language instruction: reading, writing, and comprehension. For all our students, closing the academic skill gap is our goal. Now, this gap can look very different for each of our students, and it can be variable between content areas. Our goal is to close the gap, but within the context of whole child education. We believe that a commitment to a child's social emotional well-being goes hand in hand with their academic success. So their physical, social emotional development, their self-confidence, their self-advocacy skills, the cognitive development, their connection and relationship between, with their school community and environment, and the dyslexic advantage. All of these considerations are a very important part of our programming decisions. So in the book, The Dyslexic Advantage, some of you may be familiar with that. Brock and Furnett ID talk about the acronym MIND. MIND, it acknowledges the unique perception and outlook of a dyslexic brain. M stands for material reasoning, the visual spatial strengths. I stands for interconnected reasoning, which is finding relationships. N for narrative reasoning, thinking in stories. And D stands for dynamic reasoning. So finding and recognizing patterns in real world. At Carroll School, these strengths are nurtured and promoted in not just specials like physical education, art, music, makers, bounders, but also across all subject areas. These strengths do have trade-offs. And can come at the cost of, Stephanie, we're going to stay on the previous one. Thank you. They can come at the cost of some relative weaknesses in certain kinds of fine detailed processing. Our program at Carroll School is equipped to teach systems and strategies that support our kids in building up their toolbox to process these fine details, which they might struggle with. And I'll hand it over to Ali now.
Thanks, Iram. So when thinking about the dyslexic advantage, when students come to Carroll, we really start by analyzing their cognitive profile to identify those wonderful strengths that they have, as well as those areas of need, those trade-offs that Iram had mentioned, so that we can have an in-depth understanding of our students before we place them in classes. We carefully place our students in all of their classes, but we do start with placement for language and focus area classes, which is what we are going to be focusing on tonight. So what you see here are the 5 main domains assessed by the WISC-5. The WISC is one of the assessments that we use to understand our students' cognitive profile. So the 3 columns in blue on the left are verbal comprehension, visual spatial, and fluid reasoning. These are the intellectual domains. And the 2 columns in yellow on the right, working memory and processing speed, are the efficiency domains.
Thanks, Ali. So this is a bell-shaped curve from the WISC. Many of you have this information in the neuropsychological testing and the WISC testing that you shared with us during the admission process. And this is really a common profile for many of our Carroll students. So you see here that the students we educate at Carroll are really fantastic problem solvers and thinkers. So those scores, as you see here, are solidly in the average range, these scores here that are in the blue. And what challenges our students often at Carroll are the efficiencies that drive these thinking skills, the processing speed and the working memory. So at Carroll, this is something we address explicitly, student strengths and also their areas of vulnerability. And here we see just one index score, the working memory subtest from the WISC. And you can see here that even within an index, there's quite a bit of variability between the subtests. And at the Carroll School, we really focus on that level. So looking at the WISC and whatever cognitive testing students are coming with, and kind of dig in, and that informs placement, it informs programming, it informs instruction.
So working memory, one of the cognitive efficiencies that Ali and Stephanie mentioned, plays a very important role in our students' executive functioning skills. Executive function is the brain's ability to juggle multiple thoughts and actions in an efficient manner. And all of these functions that are listed on this slide fall under the umbrella of executive function. If we were to reshuffle, and we can go to the next slide, if we were to reshuffle these functions in a hierarchy of what's at the core of strong executive function skills, this is what it would look like. At the very core, we need working memory, cognitive flexibility, self-control or inhibition to all interact and coordinate with each other so that we are able to sustain our attention on a given task. This enables us to do future planning and be more equipped to initiate a task. Cognitive flexibility and inhibition helps us monitor and adjust and shift our plan as we go along. So overall, language skills would be, really important to support all of the executive function domains. So far we have named some essential topics, like we've talked about academic skill gap, whole child education, dyslexic advantage, cognitive capacities, cognitive efficiencies, and executive function skills. And I know that we have only touched the tip of the iceberg for each of these topics, but it's important to list them because they play a very important role in our students' placement and their program design. The scale in this image is representing the balance that we strive to achieve with our students' needs and their program. Academic program is constantly evolving in response to students' baseline, their progress on their own track, their strengths and their weaknesses. So evolution of interventions, instructional approach, time and setting of how the program is delivered is expected and considered to be a positive trend. For example, our students moving from one-to-one to a pair or a group setting is a sign of growth and progress for our students.
So here we have the profiles of 3 students. So student A, we would provide the student with really targeted instruction in phonological awareness and decoding and fluency in a really intensive Orton Gillingham focus area. Student B, we might consider, given some weak efficiencies and processing speed challenges, we might consider how much language we're exposing the student to in the classroom, how much language the child might have to process when learning new information or getting directions. And we'd also have the student, given really well-developed thinking skills, use strategies like think alouds as he, she, or they problem solve to help support working memory weak efficiencies. And student C, given some difficulties coordinating between eyes and hands, if this student were in the lower school, we would make sure that he, she, or they had really explicit handwriting instruction. In the middle and upper schools, we might provide copies of teacher notes and focus on keyboarding skill development. So this kind of just shows a snapshot of how our instruction might look different given these 3 students' profiles. Across our 3 divisions, there are 3 main ways that we address students' areas of greatest need with regard to their literacy skills. The first one are core English language arts classes. We call them language class in the lower school, English language arts in the middle school, and then English class in the upper school. And the second is in our focus area. So in the lower school, our students all have an Orton Gillingham focus area. By the time they get to middle school, Orton Gillingham is one of many focus area offerings, and Ali will talk a little bit later about some of the other offerings. And that's true in the upper school as well, that Orton Gillingham would be one of several possible focus areas. And then finally, we have some flex time where we're able to give students intervention. So these are kind of in a snapshot of a schedule, all the ways that we help give students what they most need.
And for each of those 3 student profiles that Stephanie was just kind of walking us through, as they progress through lower school, middle school, and upper school, our primary goal is to make sure and really ensure that their learning rests on solid and secure foundations and there are no holes left behind. And we can move on to the next slide. Thank you, Stephanie. We do this by following the principles of the Orton Gillingham approach listed on this slide. They are the backbone of all instruction at Carroll, not just in language, but across all learning. Following these principles, instruction is direct, structured, and systematic, and highly multisensory, tapping into the dyslexic advantage that we just mentioned earlier. Our practitioners are diagnostic, and their daily lessons are prescriptive in direct response to student performance and needs. So now we will shift our focus from the global topics to the 3 domains of language instruction: reading, writing, and comprehension. Before we talk about reading, though, I think we'll stay back on the previous one. Thanks, Stephanie. So before we talk about reading, I just want to take a moment and talk about the importance of receptive and expressive language, how they have a direct impact on all academic learning and all academic tasks. Therefore, oral language skills play an important role in all 3 domains. Now we can shift to reading. The reading brain slide is a complex one, and you do not have to take it all in, but I think it's really important that we spend a little time on this so we can highlight how we think about teaching reading. The 4 main regions that I want you to focus on are, number 1, Broca's area, which is the phonological area where speech sounds are stored in the frontal lobe. In the parietal lobe, we have the angular gyrus, number 2, which can also be called the phonics chip. And at the back of the head near the occipital lobe, we have the visual word form area, which can also be called the letter box, number 3. And number 4 is the Wernicke's area, which is where word meaning is stored. So we know that reading is a visual activity. When a student looks at a word for the first time, that activates the visual word form area of the brain. And if this letterbox is not well equipped with strategies and sound symbol correspondence and letter pattern recognition, the student will struggle. So for teaching reading, we really need to follow the speech development neurocircuitry. And that means that we will first work on the phonological awareness and strengthen the Broca's area, where auditorily students work with sounds and work on their phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. Followed by, simultaneously, they would be working on the sound symbol correspondence, which would be strengthening the phonics chip. This will enable them to work on strategies, recognizing onset, rhyme, letter clusters, letter maps, so that they can then attack those words with the word attack strategies and strengthen their letter box skills. Now when the and so this will free up their resources, mental resources, to then fluently read a word or a phrase or a sentence and dedicate all the mental resources to what is called the Wernicke's area and focus on the comprehension and activate and deploy more resources to that. So based on that speech development neurocircuitry, we can split up reading instruction into two sections, as is shown by Dr. Hollis Scarborough's infographic of a reading rope. We will focus on the lower section of the rope, which is also referred as the technical skills of reading. For teaching decoding and spelling, I'll address spelling here as well, but we're focusing on reading. We use Carroll's Orton Gillingham curriculum. It is a phonics-based approach which helps us students to learn and use the alphabetic principle, the code, which is the understanding that there are systematic and predictable relationships between written words and spoken sounds. The curriculum is split into 4 levels, and these levels do not correlate to grade levels. The curriculum moves from simple, stay with that for just a second. So the curriculum moves from simple to more complex concepts, and often students will be working simultaneously in more than one level. Most of this work, decoding direct instruction, is done in the language focus areas of OG, Orton Gillingham, or it could be the reading fluency flex. So as I mentioned earlier, when teaching reading skills, it is important to start with the phonological awareness system in the Broca's area. Starting with building awareness around bigger chunks of sounds like words in a sentence or syllables in a word, and students start recognizing, getting trained into recognizing rhyming, onset, rhyme patterns, and then to the more complex task of phonemic awareness, which is really the smallest unit of spoken language. Single phonemes can have one letter corresponding to them, or it could be a cluster of letters corresponding to them. For example, in the word check, you have 3 phonemes, ch, e, k. So this training is essential to build the foundations of a strong reader. Along with phonological awareness, we teach our students sound symbol correspondence, strengthening the phonics chip in the angular gyrus. Students learn strategies and systems for word attack and work on recognizing letter maps, which may be regular or irregular, and this strengthens the visual word form area, so that when they experience a printed symbol or a printed word, there is a rapid retrieval of being able to read that word. So there are many stages of development between learning the alphabetic code and becoming a fluent reader at a connected text level. And students will move through those stages at their own pace. Learning concepts and reliable systems for decoding, such as syllable types, syllable division, and morphology, are highly effective for developing our students' reading skills. Reading assessments at Carroll can be split into 2 categories. The curriculum-based assessments, we call CBAs, these are given 3 times a year, and they show our students' direct response to their instruction for reading. Standardized assessments, which are also given 3 times a year, help us or show us the gap between where our students are compared to other students in their grade nationwide. So here's an example of an assessment that we use at Carroll. It is Read Naturally. It is a standardized assessment. And in the same grade, we may see a different gap in the academic skill of reading fluency. And this is a very important piece of information for us as we make decisions around programming and placement going forward.
Yeah, so thanks, Iram. One of the ways that we address those areas of need or gaps that Iram was just mentioning are focus areas and flex blocks. So in the middle school and the upper school, we utilize the recommendation of the previous division to place students in these blocks if that's applicable. So the middle school uses the lower school's recommendation and the upper school uses the middle school's recommendation. Or for students who are new to Carroll, we utilize their cognitive profile and admissions assessments to place them effectively. So as Stephanie mentioned earlier, the middle and upper school have an array of potential focus area blocks. A student's focus area may be an Orton Gillingham tutoring block. It could be a block to focus on other language skills, or it could be a combination of both of those things. It could also be a block that's used to solidify math skills if that's an area of need for the student. In addition to focus area blocks, we have a wide array of potential skills that could be targeted during flex blocks as well. So to highlight a few of those, we may use flex for interventions such as the TCI program, skills like keyboarding, or even additional practice with further language or math skills. So as Ira mentioned earlier as well, as a student's language skills progress, they may move into a focus area pair or a focus area group. This shift could occur once they have solidified their OG level 1 skills, they've improved their fluency, and their independence has increased. We view a transition to a pair or a group as a progress point. In our experience, it is beneficial for students to work with peers who are practicing the same skills so that they have the opportunities for collaboration and for discussion. In addition, the chance to explain their thinking to peers helps them to strengthen the skills we are hoping to develop for them.
Oops. Sorry, that was a quick preview. We could certainly talk all night about reading, but we shift here to the second component of our literacy instruction, which is writing instruction. And just like with reading, oral language really lays the foundation for our writing skills. It's one of the biggest factors in learning to write. So we just highlight here that that's something we weave into our writing instruction all the time as well. So similar to when we looked at the part of the brain that is activated when we read, here's a kind of a look at the writing brain. Writing is arguably the most difficult, most cognitively demanding task that we ask students to do in school. And this is true in very large part because of the role that our executive functions play in our ability to write. So we use our executive functions to set goals, to plan, to organize, and to manage our thoughts. And working memory in particular is really at the center of this process because that represents our ability to hold on to ideas and decide what we want to say, and hold that information long enough to choose which words we want to use and how we want to organize our sentences, and then long enough to physically write or type them on the page. Writing also requires an incredible amount of focus, attention, self-regulation, and all the skills necessary for reading. And then in addition to all of that, another layer of challenge is actually the mechanics of writing, the fine motor skills that help us to handwrite or to type. So inspired by Scarborough's reading rope, Joan Sedita developed this writing rope. And very similar to the reading rope, each of these strands represents a different component skill that creates a skilled and fluent writer. And when one strand or one skill is not acquired with fluency, it weakens the strength of the whole rope. So we're working on really teaching these skills concurrently so that they build side by side. So starting at the top, we have critical thinking, which includes generating ideas and again, just figuring out what is it that we want to say. And then we move to syntax, which includes knowledge of grammar and how to properly structure our sentences. And then we go to text structure. So that is consideration for how we might organize what we want to say for various purposes, whether we're telling a story or explaining the steps of a process, for example. And then from there, the writing craft, that includes skills like choosing really vivid vocabulary to explain what we want to say, or to use transition words to help us organize our thinking. And then finally, we move to transcription, physically writing or typing what it is that we want to say. And this is just another visual that breaks down the component skills of writing and just really helps us keep in mind that we need to be delivering instruction in all of these areas.
Thank you, Stephanie. So in lower school, we put heavy emphasis on handwriting instruction because handwriting practice not only works on the mechanics of writing, but strengthens students' ability to decode and reinforces decoding and spelling as well. In lower school, our approach to writing is highly structured and systematic. Our goal is to, again, lay a strong foundation for spelling, grammar, sentence structure, and paragraph structure. Each grade will start the year with revisiting previous year's instruction and then moving forward in all writing strands. So Project Reads We use Project Read, framing your thoughts curriculum, because it mirrors all of the OG principles and is therefore highly effective in teaching our students grammar, sentence, and paragraph structure. I would like to emphasize that oral language development plays a very important role in how a student writes. Tactile tools like expanding expression on the right-hand side are really used for oral language development, but then later on, these can be translated into a graphic organizer where students can then use the same system or roadmap to then write a descriptive paragraph. Our goal is to really get our 5th graders as independent as possible in writing an 8-sentence paragraph, which is really strong in content and in form, so that it can serve as a foundation for a multi-paragraph writing in middle school.
And then in the middle school and ultimately the upper school, we shift from descriptive and procedural writing, which is really the focus of the lower school, to more argumentative writing and literary analysis. And just as Iram just said, we make sure our students have a very solid foundation before we build from there. So in 6th grade, we make sure all students have confidence and competency in a well-structured, elaborated paragraph. And then we start to move to multiple paragraphs. We add on introductions and conclusions, and we're gradually releasing responsibility to students as they develop their skills. We also continue to build on the grammar skills. So in 6th grade, we kind of pick up with the known of framing your thoughts that many students come to us with if they've come from the lower school. And we build on that and kind of transition to more formal grammar instruction as students progress through the grades. Iram showed you a few graphic organizers that we use at the lower school. Here's just a snapshot of kind of the progression of organizers we might use at the middle school. So our students in 6th grade become very familiar with this color-coded graphic organizer. And by the time they go to 8th grade, they've built independence and they transition to what ends up looking more like kind of a typical outline. So at the middle school and the upper school, we also shift to a humanities approach, which means we align our instruction between English classes and history classes. And we really believe and see our history classes as additional English language arts classes. And that's another place where we can really provide a lot of instruction in reading and writing skills. For example, in both of these classes, our students in the middle school use POWER as an acronym to talk about the writing process.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. So at the upper school, our writing program is really focused on preparing students to effectively write and comprehend material across high school content areas. Our focus is preparing students to be independent learners in high school. So we use brain frames, which you see on the right of the screen here, both for input, which is comprehending material, and output, so creating detailed writing across content areas. So these are organizers that students can use both for understanding what they are reading and also producing writing on that. So these can quickly and easily be independently made. These are student created. So what you see there are obviously digital recreations of them, but these are things that students create with pencil and paper. They're a consistent tool that students can use on their own to engage with texts and materials, and then write about those materials in a sophisticated and detailed way, as is going to be expected of them in high school. So that wraps up our discussion of writing, and we are now going to transition to talking about comprehension. To return quickly to this graphic of the brain that Iram and Stephanie mentioned earlier, for comprehension, we are focused on the Wernicke's area at the front of the brain. So although language skills are thoroughly interconnected and processed throughout the brain, this area is where word meaning is stored. So it's where we're going to focus for comprehension. And then on the reading rope, we are now looking at the top portion. So we're looking at language comprehension, which is of course the ultimate goal and the reason why we want our students to develop fluent reading skills. And I'm going to pass it to Iram to discuss reading comprehension in the lower school.
Thank you, Ali. So vocabulary, being one of the strands in the top portion of the reading rope, plays a very important role in all lower school classes. In the younger grades, it is part of all listening comprehension instruction. But for 4th grade and for 5th grade, vocabulary is taught through a very phonics or morphological approach. Students in language class, they apply their phonics and morphology knowledge that they have learned in their in their language focus area classes of Orton Gillingham, and they learn to deconstruct a word and then work on its meaning. So morphology being the study of word parts and their meaning, the logic of this approach really appeals to the strengths of our dyslexic students. As students make progress in their reading skills, the focus has really shifted from listening to reading comprehension. And for developing deep comprehension skills, students really need two systems. First, they need a system to dissect text into concrete elements. And Project Read provides us with these visuals, and they are very student friendly, and they are very concrete pieces, and we call them puzzle charts. For the younger students, they learn to dissect a story into all these elements. Not only is this a really visual support for their learning, but it's also extremely helpful for the weak working memory. It keeps all the pieces of the story intact and in a sequence. And as they progress from 4th grade to 5th grade, the same story puzzle chart can look a little different. It is what we call a plot chart. It has more elements added to it, and there is more room for really grappling with figurative language and reading between the lines and more subtleties in text. Secondly, the students need a toolbox of thinking strategies. They need to cultivate and develop deep comprehension while they are reading. So we use reciprocal teaching thinking strategies, and these are directly taught in language classes. Students learn how to predict, question, clarify, and summarize, because their interaction with the text, which is in the, is written in the story, it is above the surface and answers questions such as what, where, when, and who, but also work with infer, making inferences and infer what is below the surface, like why did this happen? Could this have happened, or should this have happened? So those kind of skills are explicitly and directly taught in the language classes, so that students really work with what's invisible thinking, and we try to make that really visible, direct, and explicit for our students. Here's an example of samples of 3 reports that come from Track My Progress, which is a standardized assessment for English language arts. Just to bring home that same message, which is that in the same grade, we can have very different skill set in terms of where the gap is for reading comprehension, and how we respond, how the program and delivery of the program, the time and setting, how we respond to each student is really on their own track. And the last thing I would add here is that in Track My Progress, individual data points are not as meaningful as the trend line over a period of multiple data points.
Thanks, Iram. Here's a sampling of some of the strategies that we use at the middle school level to teach comprehension. So, and many of them are just an extension of what happens at the lower school as well. We use text-based questions to help students engage with the text and engage with close reading of the text. So here you see kind of an extension of what Iram talked about with the above the surface and below the surface. This is a strategy called question-answer relationship, in which we explicitly talk to students about the different kind of questions they'll be asked and how we approach them. So what does it mean to answer a question that's being asked, that's asking you to make an inference, versus a question where there's an answer directly stated in the text. And we use this claim evidence reasoning format really across many of the content areas, but this is one way we might use it to help students comprehend text. And then on the left, you see example of 2-column notes. And specifically, the student is using a strategy called notice and note, which is kind of an extension of the reciprocal teaching strategies with some more focus. Again, because we're diagnostic and prescriptive, you might not see these strategies play out in exactly the same way in every classroom. We really adjust depending on what our students need. And I refer us back here to our humanities approach. It plays out for comprehension and vocabulary as well, where we're really aligning these skills and strategies between English classes and history classes. You see the active reading strategies we use at the middle school level here. So kind of building on the ones introduced in the lower school with a lot more emphasis on inferential thinking and drawing conclusions from the text. Some of the strategies we use in English and history are the exact same, and they might look slightly different if we're comprehending like someone reading narrative text versus comprehending like a historian. We also use the plot chart that Iram mentioned with the lower school. We use that at the middle school as well. So I think students see a lot of continuity between the divisions there. And then in both history and English, and really all of our classes, but there's a heavy emphasis on vocabulary development. So we explicitly teach students rich vocabulary. We give them multiple opportunities to practice new words, to use them in various contexts. We also use a morphological approach. As Ira mentioned, that's the study of word parts. So that helps students access a whole new bank of words that share common word parts. And because we cannot possibly teach students explicitly every word that they might encounter in text, we teach a lot of strategies for determining meanings of words that they do not know, whether that's by using morphology or using context effectively. Some of the types of activities you see here are very similar to the lower school. So, specifically thinking about words in terms of their parts of speech and their morphological components, synonyms and antonyms, and then again, using them in various contexts. I'm using visuals to support understanding as well.
Okay, so I think we've thrown a lot your way. This is a most, like in a very short amount of time, we have shared a lot of dense information. So we thank you for bearing, with us, and hopefully we can answer some questions at the end. But to tie it all together, I have a visual here. It's a data plot chart that we use at Carroll, and we call it the Carroll School Skills Radar. So just to orient yourself on what is on this radar, let's just think about it as a clock face. So at 12 o'clock, from 12 o'clock till 6 o'clock, all the data points that are plotted are the cognitive scores. And then from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, what we have is all the achievement scores. So the reason why we find these radar charts really informative and helpful is because they become a snapshot of so many important considerations about a student, and they help us sort of look at connections. So for this particular example, you can see that between the intellectual capacities and the efficiencies, although the efficiencies may not be that low in terms of percentile, there's a big discrepancy. So that discrepancy can play out in learning. Again, you can also see within the academic, in the achievement scores, there is a connection or correlation between a cognitive strength or area of need and the academic skill. So reaction time being so kind of low or not so strong, you can see how it translates into the fluency measure not being that strong. And just for a reference, the more filled out each strand or the ray is, the bigger a strength that is for a student. So with that, so we find this extremely informative and a comprehensive sort of a snapshot of our students' strengths and weaknesses, and informs, keeps us on our track, on the right track for students' next year or future placement and their groupings, as well as their programming, how it's designed and delivered. So with that, I think we are going to wrap up, and thank you for joining us today. And I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And thanks we threw a lot at you, and we have some good questions. coming from the audience. So the first question, and Iram, I think I might kind of put this to you. Do the standardized tests you use compare Carroll students to students nationwide with similar learning profiles or all learning profiles?
Yes, so that's a really good question. No, it does not compare our students with other students with special learning differences or language-based learning differences. It is really with the general population. Because when we look at the gap between reading fluency of our students and other students in that grade nationwide, we want to make sure we're closing the gap between the general population and our students' skills.
And then, Iram, while I have you, just going back, so thinking about the radar chart for a second, we had a question about, is this an example for one student? So I guess I'll expand a little bit. Do we do these for all students? And how do these inform instruction?
Yeah, and I think the instruction and programming is so individualized at Carroll that all conversations, when we are having all of these conversations, they are about every single student individually. Same for the radar chart. The one I showed you is really for one student, and we do have them for all our students.
Thank you so much, Iram. Stephanie, I have a question for you about if a student is starting not until middle school or in some cases in 7th grade, how well can they catch up with other students in building foundations needed to complete the expected grade level work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's definitely something that we believe is possible, and our goal for any student that comes new to us at the middle school. And I imagine at the upper school as well. We have about 16 students new to us in the 6th grade this year and about 10 in the 7th grade this year. So we definitely have a significant portion of our population that come new to Carroll at the middle school. And excuse me, we just work, as we do with every kid, to sort of look and figure out what the strengths are and what the needs are, and to kind of catch them up and make sure that they have kind of the foundational. We don't want to assume that kids are coming with something. We know not every student comes to us from the lower school, so we're really mindful of that. And we do find that, especially at the beginning of the year, we can really kind of lay the foundation for some of those structures that we do build on for students who have been with us since the lower school.
And Ali, I guess I'll kind of put it to you, since we have some upper school families. And so how do you address the needs of a brand new upper schooler, especially when you're melding communities with some kids who've been in Lincoln previously in the lower school?
Yeah, absolutely. So just thinking about community, so at the upper school, for some context, so we have new 8th graders at the upper school, and we have 9th graders who occasionally we have new 9th graders, and we also may have 9th graders who were at the upper school previously and 9th graders who were at the middle school previously. So we do have a spread of students. And one of the ways that we just generally build community is that we are lucky to have a very small campus where we are able to, reach each kid individually as we do at Carroll, but with even more ease because of our small group. And at the same time, we're following the same Orton Gillingham, kind of diagnostic, prescriptive, and circular principles that we do throughout Carroll, meaning we start each year essentially expecting that kids may not have everything. So we start each year by relaying the foundation. So even my students who are coming from the upper school, I'm not expecting them to have everything that was given at the year before. And so we really do kind of start from square one and then go as fast as we can or as slow as we need to as we progress through the skills that we want to get to our students. So we really do start from the foundation each year and allow for students who have already received some of that instruction to get some of that refresher, and then new students to feel like they can be successful in our curriculum.
Great, thank you so much. Iram, I'm going to give you this question to start with. How does Carroll weave brain development into reading?
That is an excellent question. So I think we, over the last many years, Carroll School has really incorporated or has partnered up with a lot of brain research, a lot of brain groundbreaking discoveries that are happening around education and correlating that with the brain functions. We work so closely with MIT research. There are other neuroscientists who have been really partners with us, who have been on campus and been really part of our studying our students' profiles and seeing their progress. So we've kind of really weaved this road, and it's been coming closer and closer in terms of reading and cognitive brain development. One example is clearly our targeted cognitive intervention of reading of reaction time. So that is almost like the product of all these years of collaboration and working together with the neuroscientists. But at this point, we feel that there is enough data to kind of support that correlation between reaction time and reading fluency. And the reaction time training happens for all our students, fourth grade and above. Every year, they have an intervention in their flex block where we work on the underpinnings of how a brain reacts to a visual stimulus. And then over time, we are seeing some strong impact on their progress growth rate in the reading fluency domain. So there is a very strong correlation there, and I think we are capitalizing on it by incorporating that into our students' schedule. So we work on the underlying deficits, but then we also do the training on the academic skill, and we're seeing those two roads come closer and closer together.
Thank you very much. And just, for the audience to understand, reaction time for us it's a little bit different than what you might think of. It's basically kind of the way our kids kind of approach it is that they'll be playing kind of a video game, but it's a brain game, and they'll see a stimulus on the screen and they have to hit the space bar if they see the proper stimulus, but not hit the space bar when there's something else up there. So essentially at a very high level and very simplistic terms, it kind of asks you to glue the back and front of your brain together and very kind of quickly respond, which to my understanding mimics what we're required to do in reading, right? That slide that you showed that showed the reading brain. And so what,
Absolutely.
Yep, exactly. Yep. What you're explaining is that actually if we train our kids to do that faster and better, that it translates into higher levels of reading fluency. So I was going to...
Stacey, can I add on to that question?
Please.
I was just going to say, when Erin was talking about the dyslexic advantage, what we're really saying is that the dyslexic brain has so many advantages for learning, but it also really disadvantages folks who have dyslexia for tasks like reading and writing. But with our Orton Gillingham instruction that is really brain-based, one of the ways that dyslexia disadvantages the brain is that folks with dyslexia, when they approach tasks like reading and writing, might be over-relying on certain areas of the brain that are not the most efficient ways to read and write words. And so the Orton Gillingham instruction really helps to light the brain up in the ways that really are the parts that are the reading circuit, and to do that much more efficiently.
So that actually is a perfect segue into my next question, which I'm going to, Stephanie, hit to you and maybe to Ali, about what makes Orton Gillingham different or better than other literacy programs designed for kids with dyslexia? Why do we love OG at Carroll?
And we sure do. So I think one important distinction is that Orton Gillingham is not a program. It's really an approach, and it's the approach upon which other programs folks may have heard, or might have children that are using Wilson or Project Read Phonology or other programs. Project Read is an approach upon which all of those programs are based. And the approach really is focused on the principles that we looked at in another slide. So it's very explicit, it's very direct, but it's also diagnostic and prescriptive. And when I say when there's not a program, is there's no manual that says today we're on page 32, number 10. It really is based on how the child is responding to the intervention. And so as Orton Gillingham practitioners, we're looking at everything that each student does, and really our next step in instruction is informed by how the student is performing. So I guess that's the difference, but very sequential. Erin also talked about the multisensory component. So we're making sure that we're speaking and we're writing and we're moving our bodies, and we're using all those different parts of the brain, because that's really showed to help us kind of secure those skills as well.
Yeah, Ali.
Yeah,
I think Ali, go for it.
Thanks. Sorry. So I would echo everything Stephanie said. I think certainly the fact that Orton Gillingham is an approach, it allows the flexibility for us to really fill in some of those gaps that students have. So students may have very high level skills in some area, and there might just be a few holes in lower level areas. So being an approach and having it be flexible and diagnostic, it allows us to find those holes and really address them in an effective way, which I think is obviously a huge advantage to having Orton Gillingham.
Absolutely. The last thing I would add on that is that it's cognitively sound, emotionally and cognitively sound, meaning there are students who we saw have such high intellect and often will have efficiencies, that are not that strong. So the logic of language really appeals to our students. And what OG does is it breaks down those curriculum levels, breaks down the regular, reliable part of English language into a logic, into systems. So that appeals to our students a lot, and it really works at building their word attack and spelling skills.
Thank you so much. So Stephanie and Ali, we have a question regarding what kind of text do students read in the middle and upper school program? So maybe Stephanie, I'll start with you and then go to Ali.
Sure. So all different kinds, first of all. So in the focus areas, there's a part of the instruction where students might be reading decodable text, very focused on whatever pattern that they're studying. So for example, if I'm teaching level 3 Orton Gillingham class and my students are studying that AU and AW say we might look at a decodable text that features that pattern. So really, we can really practice and solidify that skill. So that's one type of text that students might see, but we also read novels in our English classes. Books that are just interesting and exciting for kids and high interest. And we choose our novels for a whole variety of reasons, including, the kind of the motivation and the interest piece, but reading level, of course, but that's not kind of the only consideration. We like to teach novels that expose students to multiple perspectives and multiple identities. And then in our history classes and even our science classes as well, students are reading nonfiction text, primary sources or secondary source, documentation of historical events, and then of course, science research. So all different kinds of text.
Yeah, and I would say it's similar in the upper school. I'll try not to be too repetitive, but certainly in Orton Gillingham focus areas, we do have students who are reading decodable text. In English class, we're reading novels or reading memoirs, so a variety of different text types. And a lot of the time, our goal is to choose a text that students will enjoy reading, but also a text that kind of allows us to explicitly teach perspective taking. So it's really important for us to give students the opportunity to have mirrors back on themselves, so reading text where they can see themselves in some parts of it, but also windows to other perspectives of other people that they may not be similar to. And then similarly across content areas like science, we're teaching textbook reading skills very explicitly. Again, that's something that's going to be really important for students going into high school. So we really do focus on teaching them explicitly ways to absorb information from things like textbooks and nonfiction texts.
Thank you. So we're nearing 8 o'clock, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions to each of our 3 panelists. I'll go Iram, Stephanie, and Ali, and you can answer one or both of the questions. The first of which is kind of a really parent-facing question around how do we encourage reading and writing at home? And the second question is, does spelling ever really get better? So we'll go from Iram to Stephanie to Ali, one or both questions.
Okay, so I'll take a stab at it first. To answer the first question about how do we motivate our students to read and write at home, motivation for any of these skills, develops over time. It is truly such a difficult task for some of our students who are struggling, unless intrinsically students experience success. And one of the things we do a lot of in all lower school, upper school, middle school, is to make their progress really visible to them. So students have to not only intrinsically experience that, but then they have to be shown how they are making their progress across decoding or spelling. Only then will the joy of reading kick in. And it takes time, and we expect that. But I think that joint partnership of the teachers who are teaching reading and their students. Like I talked about the whole child uh, education in the beginning of the talk, it is really important for us to make our students partners in their learning. And that partnership really builds the self-esteem and the confidence to tackle tasks that are really hard for them. So that kicks, it does come in, it does happen, but naturally at a time when reading becomes a little easier. For spelling, I would just say that it is generally always a few steps behind decoding, and it is very normal and expected that our students' spelling skills will fall in place, few steps behind their decoding skills. You have to really become a good, efficient decoder of a certain concept before it gets internalized, and a lot of practice goes into internalizing that spelling pattern. And that's why the systems are really helpful as hooks. So when you learn a certain system, or when you hear a sound at a certain part of the word in a one syllable word, you're going to spell it with this. And those are across the board in all the OG curriculum levels, that students are learning those systems. And it makes it a little bit more easier for them to hold on to those and consistently spell words correctly. But it does take time, especially with the spelling.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in about, I guess I'll address both as well. But in terms of reading and writing at home, I would say, for reading at home, as much as we can make it a really joyful and shared experience, I love reading with my children. We encourage families to do that all the time. So if there's a book you can pick together and read together, I think that's really powerful. And as much as we can have really language rich environments and discussion, kids are still, even if kids are being read to, there's so much value in students listening to read alouds, even at older ages, for models of fluent reading, for exposure to new vocabulary, for the opportunity to discuss text at a high level and expand on comprehension skills. And I think it's really about a lot of student choice. We do expect that students read outside of school, books of their choice, but we're kind of always looking for, not to say there's one perfect book, but the right match for each of our kids. And I would say for writing, I find often families say that when students are writing in functional ways at home, that's kind of a way to get them more engaged. So maybe like helping with writing the grocery list or an email to a relative, or the practice is super important for both of those skills. And then as far as spelling, does spelling ever really get better? I would say the answer is yes. I agree with Iram on that one. We have the data to show the progression of spelling skills, but for some of our students, spelling is always sort of a lagging skill. And then our goal there is to, how can we get approximate enough so that your strategies and your spell check and your other tools will help you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo all of what Stephanie and Iram said. I'll start with spelling just because the thread was left there, but absolutely, the goal is to essentially help students progress as much as they can, and then equip them with tools to make sure that they are not losing efficiency because of maybe a lagging skill. So to make sure that students are confident using the tools that they have, and that they're not feeling like they are not able to engage with something because of maybe a spelling skill that's a little bit lagging. And as far as reading at home, I would completely agree with Stephanie. As much as it can become kind of almost like a group activity, the better. So having students have the opportunity to hear a fluent reader, to really see successful reading, and then have the input and the comprehension of hearing someone read, and to always try to find something that's interesting to them. That may not always be a book. I talk to kids all the time about, like an ESPN article or something that's of interest to you. It doesn't need to be a book. It could be something that is just interesting to you that you want to learn more about. And the more that students feel successful reading, as Ira mentioned, the more that they will be open to actually using reading as a tool to learn about new interesting things, which is our goal. We want them to feel like there's something useful in this, and I can really broaden my horizons and learn more about something I'm really interested in by reading.
Wonderful.
And the only thing I will add, Stacey, is that something both Ali and Stephanie mentioned, but just to kind of make it really, really clear, that across Carroll, I think the daily reading on the weeknights is an expectation. So different grades, different amount of time, allocated time, with a lot of support for the reading materials that we would provide. for the families and for the students, so they have the right match that Stephanie was talking about. But certainly that's an expectation that daily reading, those minutes do accumulate to building the skill as well. So that's the one partnership that we always have with parents.
Thank you so much to all of you. There's one final question here that I'm going to just address myself before I say goodnight to you all. I understand there's a football game starting in a few minutes that some people might want to watch out there in the audience. There was a question around the examples of student A, B, and C that we gave, and those are sort of archetypes for us. I would say that every profile is really kind of unique and different, even within the confines of kind of the Carroll profile that we kind of look for very carefully when thinking about how to configure our classes and our grades in our school. And so I would encourage parents to ask for a data meeting or to learn more from the educators who are working with their child or student that they're here to representing. I would say if you are a first-year parent, sometimes those data meetings are not terribly as useful as they could be when we have a lot more data in year 2 and 3. But to absolutely reach out to learn more about the profile of your student. I'm sure you know this, there are several parent-teacher conferences a year, but you could always sort of access your advisor or your division head or one of the language or math heads. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to all our presenters, to Ali, Stephanie, and Iram. It was a pleasure, and really appreciative of Jen and Amy on the back end. And thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you happy almost Friday. The week is almost over. Again, should you have any additional questions, parent questions at carrollschool.org. And again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.